Okay, so I've created a setup here where I'm routing the audio out of my OPZ and into Ableton, and this is a demo of the noise issues that I'm hearing. And you'll notice that the only cable that I have plugged in here is just the 3.5 millimeter output. Don't have this plugged into USB because there are also issues with noise coming in through USB channels, and I don't want to show anything about that here. Now, that's not to say that I couldn't be causing some sort of ground loop because of the 3.5 millimeter cable that I have, but I'm also experiencing this issue when I'm using just like earbuds and the device is 100% isolated, so I don't think that I'm causing any sort of ground loop with the cable that I have plugged into my audio interface. So just so you can see that the audio is in fact coming from here, I'm going to just play. I just have a pattern with just a single note at the beginning and some like delay. Okay, so I have set up a separate channel here, and this track, the way that it works is that I'm first monitoring the spectrum, like the frequency spectrum of the input. And then I'm going to be filtering that to only show the highs, and then I'm going to be limiting it and increasing the gain substantially so that we can actually hear what's happening here. So I'll go ahead and activate that, and sorry about the fact that this will actually be a little bit noisy. So let's go ahead and show what we've got coming in. Okay, so you can already see that over here on the right side we have some noise that's coming in, but this is extremely low. I mean, this noise is coming in at like negative 84 decibels, and it's predominantly happening above, above 12K, so it's not terribly audible. It'd be pretty easy to fix. But I'll just show you what's going to happen. If I go ahead and hit the mixer button, you can see that we get substantially more of that noise that's coming in as long as I hold that down, and it is actually coming in at a low enough frequency that it's just barely audible. You might be able to hear it back there. This also happens if I hit the track button. Although you can see that you might be able to see that the signature of the noise is slightly different. So this one I'm getting a really substantial peak at 8.5 kilohertz, and then a lesser peak at 4.2, 4.3 kilohertz. Whereas this one, I'm getting just about the same amount at 4.3, but like nowhere near as much at 8.5. So let's go ahead and bump up the gain on this a little bit, and then you'll really be able to see what's going on. So now I'm just showing the noise part of this, I'm cutting out frequencies below 4 kilohertz essentially. So that will happen when you're playing live. That'll actually be coming through your audio system. Now, other buttons don't seem to really have the same effect. For example, weirdly enough, project button, if anything, just reduces the amount of noise. So you can see when I hold down the project button, you see this over here, not getting anywhere near as much. And the screen button has this weird oscillating effect. And I believe the metronome actually totally kills, almost totally kills the noise. We can see we're getting peaks that are coming in above negative 66 right now, but really not much to speak of. And I mean, look at the difference between this is holding down the metronome button versus the mixer button. So, of course, these numbers are all, wrong and everything because I'm running this through this limiter and adding 24 decibels of gain to everything, but I'm sure that you can see, it's a bit of an issue when pressing buttons that you would absolutely need to play while playing live. Like, you're going to be pressing the mixer button here all the time in order to switch mute groups. That would be my assumption, at least. Most people would use that as their workflow. So, kind of an issue. Okay, so I was going to give a demo to the issue where sounds from the OP1 will not import properly into the OPZ, but I'm kind of having a problem here even getting that to happen, which may be a separate bug for Windows users. If I turn my device on in content mode, I think they call it, disk mode, whatever you want to call it, you'll see that after a while here, the files for the OPZ will actually pop up. It takes some time for whatever reason. Okay, there we go. So we have our stuff here. Now I've put a patch on user 2 for the OP1, which is a using the digital synth, which I believe is also on the OPZ. I don't know if that matters, and they haven't said that that matters, but I kind of suspect that it could. So if I go here and copy this and then go into sample packs, and I'll just put it as a lead, I'll go to slot 8. Remember 8. Throw that there. Now the next step would be, okay, so I've put my my synth patch on the OPZ, and I should go and eject it. The OPZ, that is. Okay, we can see that it closed the window. It says safe to remove hardware, but nothing happens here. And what should be happening here, they actually have on in their guide, it says, this is this step, safely eject the USB disk. OPZ will update and restart when ready. Do not power off your device during this process. Okay. But it is ejected, and nothing is happening. We have the OP1. We can go and take a look at what's plugged in. We have this right here is the OP1. There's no OPZ. So I mean, it's safely ejected, so we can just remove the cable. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, nothing happens. So I should note that I also have a Mac that I use for work, and I've tried this exact same process on the Mac, and there are no issues there. I thought this could possibly be an issue with the USB hub that I was plugging it into, so I'm now actually plugging the OPZ directly into my computer. So that's definitely not it either. And I'm, kind of just wasting time right now because I'm hoping at some point this thing will just recognize, hey, I've been ejected, and it'll just reboot. But I've waited for quite a long time, and it just doesn't happen. So I'm not really sure what to do because, I mean, they do specifically tell you in their instructions right here, OPZ will update and restart when ready. Do not power off the device. Now, I suspect that this is actually not as important as it might sound, because what they're really saying is the device will restart when it knows that it's ready to do that. So when it detects that it's no longer connected to a computer, it'll just go ahead and restart. So I'm guessing that if you just power cycle it manually, that would probably work the same way, although perhaps it won't run the part in the code that actually takes the new samples and integrates it into the machine. But I've done this on a Mac where it does recognize the fact that it's been ejected, and this doesn't work there either. So, just for the heck of it, let's just try plugging it back in, see what happens. Oh, just pops up instantly. So we can see that the file is still there, so no problem with that. And then again, I will just go ahead and eject it. Okay, so device is not in there right now. Go ahead and pop the cord out. And let's just go ahead and try power cycling it. Okay, off and then on. Now you'll notice that when it powered up, you may have seen that this light displayed with just a single white LED. Let's try just power cycling one more time, see if that happens normally. Okay, yeah, that does happen normally. I noticed that when I did this on my Mac, that right before it restarted, that one LED came on, so I thought maybe that was a sign that it was integrating the content. But regardless, if we go to the lead, we definitely do not have patch number 8, so it did not recognize that. Now, I can go and test this on my other computer, but unfortunately it's going to be significantly harder for me to record a video where I am doing that on the other computer, so you're just going to kind of have to trust me. But yeah, so apparently independently of this particular import issue, there's also an issue where if you use a Windows machine, you may not ever be able to have it actually properly update content when you eject it. I would be curious to see if this would happen with somebody else's OPZ though. Okay, so this one is going to be quite a lot harder to explain. This is the step component spark counter reset does not work. So let's go ahead and jump into that. Okay, so the idea with this is that the step component spark allows you to have steps or components or parameters that selectively trigger on certain measures. So what I have here is I have a pattern, and this is in the pattern number 2 for project 2 here. And this pattern has 4 snares that trigger in these positions, and they only trigger on the second measure. So we can hear that by just playing it. You can see they don't trigger, and then they do trigger. Okay, working perfectly. We can see what that looks like by going and looking at these, holding that down, and now we can see that yes, indeed, this is set to only trigger on the second measure. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to play, I'm going to first play this other clip, and all this clip just has a single snare that's in position 8, and there's nothing special at all to this pattern. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this pattern, and then I'm going to play the other pattern. And what we'd be expecting to happen, at least what I would have initially expected to happen, would be that it will play this pattern, then it'll play the other pattern, and each time it'll only play 16 steps, which means that when it plays the second pattern, it shouldn't play the snares at all. It should then just, after playing that pattern, switch back to this pattern and then play this pattern again with a single snare. So the second pattern, we should never hear any snares play. But what will actually happen is that we will hear the snares because the measure count is not per pattern based, it's actually global. So we'll go ahead and chain these two patterns together and then play. Okay, so in a sense, everything is working exactly as we expect it to, in that spark, or the trigger spark is saying to only play that on the second measure, and because the count of those measures is global, the first pattern that we play takes one of those measures, and then the second pattern is the second measure, so it does in fact trigger those steps. Here's the trick, what you may have noticed if you're paying really close attention, is that if we actually go to the second pattern, I actually have another step component here on the first step, and this step component on the first step is actually a trigger spark step component set with 0, which should reset the counter. So if this was working the way that I would think that it would work, then what would happen is that no matter how long we played this second pattern, those steps should actually never trigger, because every time that the pattern plays, it should be resetting the measure count back to the first measure, I suppose. So it would just be, play through and then reset, and then play through and then reset, never actually advancing the measure count past 1, and so never actually triggering that. But obviously that is happening, so clearly in that position that's not working. But I thought, well, maybe it expects that you have to put that step component on a step that actually has a sound playing, which is why on the first pattern, this step with the snare is actually exactly that. We have on that step, it is resetting the trigger step component back to 0. So that, I guess, would be, or resetting it to 1, which I guess then, depending on whether or not the remainder of the measure counts, might have it then playing the second measure and incrementing that back to 2 anyway, which would then cause those triggers to play. So let's go ahead and go back to the second one, and let's add in a step here, so that now we actually have the step with the trigger component, which we can see again is set to 0. So that really should be working. And now if we do this again, we'll see that it does play every time. So yeah, kind of complicated, right? To me it's a bit confusing because, I mean, first of all, it just doesn't seem like the spark step components should be based on a global measure count. It seems like they should be based on a pattern measure count, because if we just play the second pattern, we can see that it works as we would expect it to. The first time it only plays the clap on the one, and then the second time that it plays the rest of the snares, which is how we would expect. It's a little bit weird that then you play this in a sequence with another pattern and it works completely differently. In fact, we never get that the second pattern will not play because of how that's set up now. But even with that being confusing, the way that that works, once you understand that it's a global measure count, it still, makes enough sense. But yeah, this reset, and we can go and look that up in here if we want. Reset counter. The only thing that I could think reset counter means is reset the measure counter, since, this whole thing just deals with counting measures. Reset counter. If you can find a way to make it work, that would be wonderful, but I have tried this particular parameter in every conceivable position, and it just doesn't do anything. Okay, so here we have the key/mode recognition forgets what key your song is in, and botches chord changes. Let's go ahead and test that one. Okay, so what I have set up here is I have two patterns. Well, one of them just has absolutely nothing in it, but one of them has a single note. This note is a... actually, let's switch to that. So we have a chord. When we have a chord that is not in C, and that's important because what that means is that if we're going to be doing key changes, it has to actually recognize what that chord is before doing the key changes will work. So we have that chord, and then separately on the master track, we have a single note here, which is just saying to play this different chord. So we can hear that if we just preview what this note is, it's this chord, but then if we play the pattern, we get a different chord because we're changing the key, okay? So it's important to remember what this sounds like. Because what I'm going to do is I'm just going to chain together to play another measure in between playing that measure. So we're giving it some time where we're letting it kind of just sit there and do nothing in between playing this chord. So what happens? That's not the chord that it was supposed to play. And in fact, I believe if we sequence so that this pattern, the one with the chord, plays first, let's see what happens. We get that particular chord, and then nothing, and then a different chord. How can that be? And from now on, it'll play this other chord. So what's happening is that the first time that it plays, I'm not exactly sure I understand what's happening here, but I believe that it's analyzing the chords that are in that pattern, and then it's figuring out what key it's in based on that, and then because I'm then changing the key, it's able to correctly change it to some other chord. Then when we give it some time, it's just sitting there and saying, well, I've got no input, so then for some reason it assumes that the chord that is playing is or the key that it's playing in is a different key than the one that it previously recognized. So the issue here is that when there isn't any input, or when there's input that doesn't conflict with the chords that you have already set up, or the key, the mode that you've already set up, it's just changing the key out from under you. And then when you get back to the pattern that you were on before, it's then playing it as if you were in that other key instead of the key that it's actually in. Kind of confusing, but you can see that we have just one pattern here. There's only one chord that's being played, and there's only one different there's only one chord change that we're playing. So we should get the same chord every time, but when we play it, clearly that's not happening. So yeah, that's that bug. Okay, so we're on to manual saving. Manual saving mode is completely broken. You will lose all your work if you use it. Now, I'm actually happy to report that since I did significant testing of this, it appears that this is actually not the case. I definitely was able to confirm like repeatedly that this was a problem, and now it's not. So I guess I'm not exactly sure what changed. There was no firmware update. There was no change in what I'm doing, like my methodology, but it is not happening anymore. So I'll go ahead and show you the steps that I used to reproduce this previously, and then you'll see how manual saving is in fact working now, which is good because it's a pretty important feature. Although I may not be using it since I've had it not work in the past, and I actually lost several hours worth of work because I saved a project and then it didn't save the project, and I restarted the device and all of my work was gone. So anyway, yeah, there might be a bug in the code that causes this to sometimes not work. It wasn't working every single time that I tried this previously, and now it's working every time, so I can't really explain that. Still probably something that they need to look into, but let me just show you really quickly my methodology here. So I have project 4 selected, and there's just nothing in this entire project. So I'm going to go ahead and enable the manual save mode. Manual save mode is now enabled. You can see because the track light is illuminated with a red light. We'll go ahead and we'll just, doesn't matter what track we're on, although we'll make note of it. It looks like we're on the chord track right now. So we can see that we've inputted some notes. Now, if I just turn the device off and turn it back on right now, we should lose all of that work because we haven't saved anything. So let's just test that. Okay. Okay, we're back on project 4, and we can see that, in fact, we have lost the work, which is good. That's how it's supposed to work. So let's go ahead and turn that back on. And now I will enter in some notes. Okay, we're still on the chord track. We have those notes. Now I'm going to go ahead and hold the project button down. That should have just saved it. And turn it off. Turn it back on. And you can see that we have the notes. They've persisted to this this time when we turned it back on. So manual saving is definitely working right now. Yeah, like I said, I have no idea why it wasn't working before, but that is the exact set of steps that I used to test it before, and it just was not saving. So yeah, that one might not be a bug, or it might be an intermittent bug. Okay, so now we're on to step parameter changes do not last for the step's duration. They end after the step, regardless of program step length. So what does that mean? Well, we are in the arpeggiator here, and we have a single step that has a length of 8, and if we listen to it, it sounds like this. Okay, so if we want to change a parameter for this particular step, we hold it down, and then we change some parameters. So I'm just going to change how that synth sounds. Now, what I would expect to happen is that those parameter changes should last for the whole time that the step lasts. But that is not the case. So you might think, okay, well, that's actually kind of a feature, right? Because that means that we have individual control over each step, and you're not going to have some long step that's going to dictate a parameter that's going to override everything for like the rest of the track. But I don't actually think that that's a very valid argument, and maybe there's other arguments for why it's done this way. I think that it's a bug, but here's what I think. Every note that plays will override the parameters that were played on previous notes. So if I entered in, some other note here, and then I change the parameters there, just because that's happening after the first note, it should actually change the parameters if the parameters have been customized on that note. So just because, like, if this worked the way that I wanted it to, where that first note, the parameter changes would hold through all 8 steps, if I were to make a change, if I were to enter that note, here, and then I were to change those same parameters here, then moving forward, it would either change them to what they are here, and then if this note held for any length, it should hold those parameter changes, or if this note ends, then it should just revert them back to what the track's parameters are. So I don't actually see how this is in any way helpful, and all that it means is that if you do want to hold out like parameter changes like this, here's what you have to do. you have to change the note back so that it's just a single note long, and then you take that note and just copy it across the entire duration that you want, and now it works the way that we wanted it to. I think that I think to me it's pretty clear that this is not really how it's supposed to work. We have the ability to say how long a note should last, and things that affect that note should probably affect how long it lasts. Maybe not step components, since those are a little bit more of like a, just sort of like a one and done sort of thing. But I think that actually step components do last for the note's duration. Let's test that out really quick. So if we have this note for the first eight steps, and then we add a double step component. No. So that kind of makes sense to me, personally, because it's a lot easier to customize that. You don't have to actually set any of the rest of those notes. You can just go in here and set up step components for all of those. So that kind of makes more sense, that the step components operate on each step independently, and don't last for as long as the note lasts, but I think parameter changes probably should. So depending on how you look at it, this is either a bug or it's just a inconvenient feature. Okay, so here we have sending new patches from iOS apps sometimes results in broken silent patches on OPZ. Now, this one, I'm really not sure how I would reproduce it. I think that it's likely that this is something that this was just a bug that happened during the transmission of this through Bluetooth or something. Hard to say. So you may never actually be able to duplicate this, but I can show you on my device how it works right now. I took one of the new patches that they have on the app, and I just went ahead and put that on the device. So right now, in slot 4 for the kick drum, you can see everything works just fine. We go ahead and switch to slot 5. So there you have it. I have a patch which does exist on the device, but there's no audio content for that patch. So that was the result of what happened when I installed a new patch from the iOS app. Okay, now we're finally to the last of our bugs here. OPZ becomes unresponsive and crashes at random. Now, I'm sure you'd be really impressed if I could just show you this. I'm not going to be able to do that. It's very random, and it does seem like so far it's been kind of related to things like doing certain things through the app. So I could see there may be still being some bugs with quickly switching between certain things. Maybe the app isn't keeping up. I don't know. There's some sort of bug there. It's kind of hard to say, and I'm sure that this is something that they're just going to resolve as they find them. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't really show you what that looks like, but I've had a number of times where I've managed to trigger the device actually doing a full restart. And I mean, it's very easy to tell when the device restarts because it actually does this when it restarts. It does the whole little LED thing, it plays the sound. So yeah, if you are able to find some repeatable way to do that, then it would be great if you could post about it, because if we find these things and we're able to repeat them, then we can actually send those things to Teenage Engineering and they can fix them. But for right now, I don't have any of these that I can do on demand, unfortunately.